treat, trick or treat, trick or treat for Halloween. Better give a treat that's good to eat if you want to keep life serene. Trick or treat, trick or treat, trick or treat, trick or treat, trick or treat the whole night through. Little scalawags with fiendish gags can make it tough on you. So when ghosts and goblins by the score ring the bell on your front door, better not be stingy or your nightmares will come true.
Hello YouTube and welcome to our spooky spectacular Halloween special.
I think obviously you can see here what we're going to talk about today. Obvious choices for our first Halloween retrospective, but you know what? Very valid games to talk about, very worth your time here.
Okay, well today I get to talk about one of my personal favorite games of all time, and that would be Friday the 13th.
He's back. He's the man behind the mask, and he's out of control. He's back. The man behind the mask.
Isn't exactly the nicest looking game
No.
in the system's lifespan, but it is very colorful during the day.
I was about to say, yeah, it's very, very colorful. Not really what you expect from a Friday the 13th game,
Not at all.
but it works itself out very, very well. So
This happens to be one of my favorite games because it has a day and night system in it. So the daytime seems very bright, vibrant, with zombies flying around.
And I mean, it's kind of a perfect example too of like a game that can do that day to night transition perfectly.
Once it hits the nighttime, it is very dark and very dreary, and it does a very good job of doing that. Especially when you're in the caves. The caves look very, very, like, I don't want to use the word scary because it's not scary.
No, it's definitely not too freaky.
But it's definitely dark. A presentation for your characters. I mean, everybody's seen it. Everybody knows Jason's purple.
Yes.
That seems
Get over that very quickly. Let's put it that way.
You really do, because he is a threat, and he was definitely a threat back then.
Yep.
Myself, I think this is probably one of the first starts of the survival horror games. Maybe not the first, but pretty darn close, I think. Some people find the music rather annoying.
It's very repetitive.
Yeah, they're all annoying, and I gotta be biased here. I can't just put my personal opinion on it. Because I do, like, it's got such a sense of nostalgia to me that I love that music. It really is something big to me. It reminds me of being a kid, but if I were to play it now, yes, this music is very repetitive.
Yeah.
Yes, this music is annoying.
Grating.
And very piercing to the ear, too. It's a very, very high-pitched song for most of the parts.
Admittedly, I do enjoy the cabin song.
Gameplay in this is actually really, really cool. It's a very interesting style of gameplay. One thing that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about is Jason himself being an entity in the game.
Yeah.
He can show up while you're walking on the paths.
Random.
Yeah, very randomly, just walking on the paths. He'll show up in cabins that don't have people, but essentially, the point of the game is Jason's going around killing all the camp counselors and all the children.
Yep.
You get a game over if all your camp counselors died or all the children have died. So you got to keep a close eye on both those things.
And you do have a choice between the counters too. You get 6 in total, 3 guys, 3 girls, and they're not all the same too. Some guys run a little faster,
jump higher.
Some guys jump higher. Some guys, I guess, maybe do a little more damage. I would say.
Yeah. George does more damage and is slower and doesn't jump as high. Which is something that to me it was something that was new.
Yeah.
Something I had never dealt with, that you could choose different types of strengths and weaknesses with people, which you see predominantly in almost all games nowadays. One thing that Jason does do that most people don't talk about is that he has a set path that he will continuously go on, and you can kind of follow him. If you find him, just keep following him in the same path.
Isn't it counterclockwise he moves?
I think it's counterclockwise. And you can follow him the whole way through and attack him on the outside, which I will suggest you do, because outside is the best place to avoid his attacks, and the inside the cabins are a little bit harder. Now, inside the cabin becomes almost like a first-person view, even though it isn't. But it's
first person.
Pseudo first person. It's kind of similar to, you can dunk out of the way by pushing down and left or down and right to do ducks on either side. But that's really a very interesting aspect of the game that I think is overlooked from a lot of people. One problem that I find with this is that the health bars are a little unfair. You lose a lot of health with every time you get hit. And it doesn't matter what you get hit by. It's not necessarily Jason that kills off all your energy. It's bats, why there's bats in every single horror game out there, but there is.
Well, easy to program, right?
Yes.
But also the crappy thing about the whole health bar you mentioned, like the potions do absolutely nothing.
Yeah,
in this game.
you only fill up a small little bit of
Yeah.
the health bar every time. Very little whatsoever. And it's treated the same way that like fairies in Zelda is treated. If you have them, it'll automatically do it if you go down to 0.
Exactly.
But it doesn't give you much. It just kind of lets you get to the next cabin if you survive, Jason. For my first pro on this, I'm going to say general feel and presentation of this game is great. I definitely like the atmosphere behind it. Again, I know a lot of people don't like the music, but to me that set a tone to this game.
Oh, exactly.
It made me feel really uneasy while playing it.
For me, my first pro is actually going to be the various characters you get. So I guess my first con for the game, honestly, I'm going to have to say the music.
My first con is going to be navigation through the forests and the caves. If you don't have it memorized, which I do, but I didn't, you can get completely lost in those places and not have a clue where to go. So all in all, Friday the 13th, although not being necessarily the best game, or the best horror game for that matter, I would definitely put this as a 7 out of 10. I know it seems a little high to a lot of people, but this is a game that I played a lot of. I can beat almost any time I pop it in. It takes a little bit of time. I don't always beat it, but for the most part I can pretty much beat this game every time, so I put it a little bit higher because I figured it out. And that's why it gets a higher rating for me.
And actually, it's a good point to bring up, and that's for me why I'm going to actually give it a 6 out of 10. While I really enjoy the game, admittedly, I can't say this game is for everyone. Like you mentioned, unless you figure out those things and how this game works, you're probably going to have a really difficult time playing this. So on to our next game for today's episode. Of course, again, very obvious what this game is here at Nightmare on Elm Street on the NES. Of course, very dark and gritty in this one, a little more so than Friday the 13th, just because it's pretty much all at night.
It's definitely a very dark and droopy game.
Yeah.
Like from beginning to end. There's no really light, like a very vibrant area in this
No,
game.
definitely not. So of course the sound in this game, kind of very basic NES sounds, but the music in this game, I absolutely really love the music in this game. And actually there's a very good reason for that. So a lot of people don't realize this game is actually made by Rare.
Yep.
The composer for this game, one of the greatest video game composers of all time, David Weiss, who's worked on stuff like Donkey Kong Country, of course The Nightmare on Elm Street, RC Pro-Am, different Rare games of the day.
I think I almost prefer the music in the Dream World than I do the real world. That's for damn sure.
It does change up a little bit when you switch over. Especially that like rockin' tune you go in between.
Yeah, that's...
So in this game, you're always kind of trying to fight sleep as you would in the movie. So basically, once you go into sleep mode, Freddy's kind of more of a danger at this point.
Because you have a time limit before he shows up, and you start hearing that Freddy song. By the time the end of the song shows up,
shit's going down.
Yeah,
it's getting tough out there.
You get to fight Freddy for a little bit, and Freddy in its full form, a ghost form, I guess you can say.
Yeah.
Because the whole point of this game, which is a little bit different than what you'd expect, because it's almost part 4.
A little bit.
They got to bring Freddy back together, and if you've watched part 4 of the Dream Warriors, what they have to do is take Freddy's bones and resurrect him.
And that's literally what you're doing in the entire game. You're collecting bones. When you get to a certain area, you have to find all the bones before you can even move on to the next one. And there is a counter too.
Yep.
So at least they let you know, like, hey, you're missing 1 or 2 left. And sometimes they are in odd places that you
hard to see.
Yeah, hard to see, and like sometimes hard to get to.
The backgrounds are covering it in a way like just it blends in.
Basically, you have the base character, which is just your Dream Warrior, and then as you go into the dream, you can find little icons that can turn you into the athlete.
One of 3 things.
What are the other 2?
There's an athlete, a ninja, and a wizard.
Ah, yes, the ninja and the wizard. So pretty much all three feel very different. They're not just carbon copies of each other.
The ninja's got the kick.
Yep, ninja's got the kick. Like I mentioned, the athlete has like a javelin he can throw at you.
Yeah, with a jump, a higher jump with a spin.
Yeah, and the wizard's got like a spell, I guess.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So the first time you fight Freddy, obviously he's just kind of walking back and forth, very simple. And then as you progress in the game, he gets a lot harder. Kind of like in the movies, like he just kind of gets stronger. Second time or third time, you're either fighting as a hand, he comes at you as a head, flying around. So definitely different ways to actually fight him, and not always the same thing.
Yeah, and you get that variety of having different choices. You get your ninja and wizard and stuff. So it really makes for an interesting game and a different way of playing.
For my first pro, just the overall atmosphere of the game. Unlike Friday the 13th, like we mentioned, it's always very dark. Really gets you into that Nightmare on Elm Street feel where it's like, it's always happening at night because you've got to go to sleep.
My first pro, I'm going to go with the variety of characters that you get to use when you're in the dream world. Because as soon as you fight Freddy, you're automatically in the dream world. So it just shoots you right in there. So whatever characters you have unlocked at that point, you can use.
For me, my first con of the game, I would have to say, unfortunately, some of the level design. Like we mentioned, when you're finding the bones, sometimes you're in hard places to see or even to get to. Sometimes you don't realize you need to switch the athlete to even have a better chance of getting to it.
My first con is going to have to be not knowing where to go because it's not house for house for house for house. And some of the doors will be open, you can't go in. Some of the doors will be closed and you can go in them.
Okay, so my second pro of the game, actually going back to the music. I mean, this is legitimately a soundtrack I absolutely love. When I listen to NES chiptunes, this is one I actually listen to. I really, really enjoyed the music. And again, it's David Weiss. I'm sure a lot of you guys know his work, and it's very, very well done. Okay, so my final con of the game is the fact that this is a 4-player game and rarely anyone ever takes advantage of that.
I did once, it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
It was cool, it was interesting to do. All 4 of us playing a Freddy game, but it was actually pretty cool.
Okay, so finally coming to our final score of the game, like we both mentioned for both of these titles, they do get a lot of crap on the internet, but you know what, you really need to give it a shot. They're both really great games. For me, I'm going to give A Nightmare on Elm Street a 7 out of 10. Just because I think this is a lot more solid game. It's actually really fun, and I think this one's definitely worth your time.
Myself, I'm not going to give it quite as high. I'm going to go with a 5.5. One, just because I haven't played this one nearly as much as what I did with this one for like the horror style games. I'm not as big of a fan of platformers. I do like platformers, but not as big of a fan. So that kind of shoots it down. And there was just, the cons really were big cons for me in comparison to the pros. They really were. Those things were big things to me that I didn't like. So yeah, I give it a 5.5. Now, to end this whole Halloween episode off, don't always judge a book by its cover. These games are not as bad as everybody says. Don't believe everything you hear on the internet. Don't believe us. Go try it for yourself. These are games that are constantly shit on, and we like them. Well, thank you very much for joining us for this spooktacular, cliche Halloween episode that we had to do because everybody does a Halloween episode, and this is ours. And yes, we did the ones that everybody does. So they're out of the way.
But it's a good starting point, like you said, out of the way now. Next year,
who knows what it's going to be.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got a couple ideas I'm working on. I don't know about you. So we'll see what happens with that. But either way, I'm Ed.
I'm Maxx.
And we'll see you next time.
Trick or treat, trick or treat, trick or treat for Halloween. Better give a treat that's good to eat if you want to keep life serene. Trick or treat, trick or treat, trick or treat, trick or treat, trick or treat the whole night through. Little scalawags with fiendish gags can make it tough on you. So when ghosts and goblins by the score ring the bell on your front door, better not be stingy or your nightmares will come true. Ha 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 ha